Somewhere in Madrid, right now, hangs one of the most important paintings in the history of art. You have almost certainly never heard of it, and for nearly 200 years, the people who walked past it every single day had not really seen it either. The Museo del Prado owns over 20,000 works. This one drew no special attention. It was catalogued as an anonymous copy of the Mona Lisa. Competent, forgettable, the kind of painting a museum keeps because it keeps everything. Visitors on their way to see Raphael and Andrea del Sarto passed it without slowing down. The museum's own label described it in a single line, a copy, early 16th century, unknown hand. In June 2011, a routine loan request changed everything. The Louvre was planning an exhibition and asked to borrow the painting. Before shipping it to Paris, Prado conservators decided to give it a proper technical study, the first it had received in nearly 200 years on the wall. They carried the small wooden panel into a restoration studio. They switched on an infrared camera, and what appeared on the monitor should not have been possible. Behind the sitter's shoulder, where this copy showed nothing but a flat, featureless field of black. The infrared light passed through the paint and found something underneath. A landscape, a winding road. Pale, distant mountains. The same mountains visible behind the original Mona Lisa in Paris. Someone had deliberately painted over them, covered them so completely that not one restorer, not one curator, not one art historian in 2 centuries had suspected they were there. The question was not only what had been hidden, the question was who had hidden it and why. To understand why that matters, you need to understand what the world believed about this painting going in. Its earliest known trace is a 1666 inventory of Madrid's Royal Alcazar Palace. One line, a woman by Leonardo da Vinci's hand. Not a Leonardo, merely a copy of one. The description followed the painting for the next 3 centuries. When the Prado opened in 1819 and inherited the royal collections, the painting arrived already downgraded, already dismissed. Museum records even misidentified the wood it was painted on, calling it poplar, and nobody looked closely enough, for 200 years, to notice the mistake. One detail should have stopped them. At some point in its history, someone had thought this painting important enough to produce a lithograph of it, a printed reproduction. You do not commission lithographs of things you consider worthless. Nobody followed up on that either. Meanwhile, the original had become the most recognized face on Earth. Painted by Leonardo beginning around 1503, carried personally by him to France, it now hangs in the Louvre behind bulletproof glass, drawing millions of visitors a year. Its Madrid counterpart had never been restored, never been seriously studied. It hung on the wall, year after year, decade after decade, its background inexplicably black, its landscape buried, its secret intact. Someone had made very sure of that. And they had almost succeeded permanently. The investigation did not begin as a search for a secret. It began as a loan request. In 2010, the Louvre asked to borrow the Prado's modest copy for an exhibition built around one of Leonardo's final masterpieces, The Virgin and Child with Saint Anne, scheduled to open in Paris in March 2012. Before agreeing, Prado conservators decided the panel deserved a proper technical study, something it had never received in nearly 200 years on the wall. In June 2011, it was carried into the restoration studio for the first time. The team began where the eye already suspected trouble. That flat black background. Examined under infrared light and raking illumination, the black field stopped looking like part of the original composition and started looking like a later addition, and chemical analysis of the surrounding varnish confirmed it. The black paint had been applied more than 2 centuries after the panel was first made, sometime after 1750, by a hand the museum could not identify. The work of removing it was slow and exacting. Solvent applied in tiny test patches, the black paint lifted away in fractions of a centimeter at a time. The conservators, unsure, at first, how much of what lay beneath had survived 2.5 centuries of darkness. What they found was a landscape, preserved almost perfectly, a parapet, a winding path, pale mountains echoing the same forms visible behind the far more celebrated face in Paris. That discovery alone rewrote the painting's catalog entry. But the infrared cameras kept looking, this time beneath the paint layer itself, at the underdrawing no viewer had ever seen. And there, conservators found something that should not exist in an ordinary copy. Every pentimento in Leonardo's original, a shift in the line of the bust, a change to the outline of the veil, a small adjustment in the position of the fingers, was repeated here, stroke for stroke, in the Prado panel. The two sets of figures were not just similar, they were identical in size and shape, as if traced from the very same master drawing. Copies made later, by other hands, do not share an artist's private second thoughts. Only someone working beside Leonardo, in the same room, at the same time, could have captured that. What the infrared cameras had found was not simply evidence of a skilled copyist. It was evidence of presence, proof that whoever held this brush was standing in Leonardo's own studio, watching him invent the most famous portrait in history one decision at a time, not imitating a finished painting from across a room years later. Both panels, conservators discovered, had been built from the same master drawing, a single design transferred onto two separate pieces of wood before either artist had picked up a brush. That fact alone reframes the entire relationship. This was never a copy chasing an original. It was a second voice in the very first draft. Apprentices training under a Renaissance master were routinely set to shadow his most important commissions, learning by replicating his choices step by step rather than working from sketches alone, which may explain why Leonardo allowed it. So who held the brush? The Prado's own curators point first to two names familiar to anyone who has studied Leonardo's inner circle: Francesco Melzi, the devoted young nobleman who would become Leonardo's heir and the keeper of his notebooks, and Salai, the unruly pupil Leonardo kept close for more than 2 decades, ever since taking him into his household as a boy. Other scholars push back, proposing instead 2 Spanish painters known to have trained in Italy during these years, Fernando Yáñez de la Almedina and Hernando de los Llanos. No signature, contract, or workshop record settles the argument either way. The department head who led the Prado's research has admitted, in effect, that the museum had no idea what it was holding until this study forced them to look. When the Spanish newspaper El Mundo reported the findings in 2012, it gave the painting a nickname that stuck: Mona Lisa's twin. And one mystery the restoration could not touch at all. Roughly 2.5 centuries after the panel was finished, someone deliberately buried that landscape under flat black paint, erasing the clue that would one day prove the painting's importance. No record names them. No reason survives. Whoever did it may have thought a plainer background looked more dignified, or simply more sellable. Or perhaps they were trying to distance an awkward copy from an original they assumed it had nothing to do with. The truth died with them. Today, the painting once dismissed as a forgettable copy carries a very different museum label: Studio of Leonardo da Vinci, created alongside the Louvre's masterpiece between roughly 1503 and 1516 by a pupil working at the master's side. We will likely never know that pupil's name with certainty, but we know what survives in their work: high-grade pigments like lapis lazuli and red lacquer, the same quality of material Leonardo himself favored, used by someone the historical record never thought important enough to identify. Because this panel escaped the centuries of smoke, handling, and yellowing varnish that have quietly dulled its more famous twin, it now offers something the original cannot: a glimpse of color and clarity closer to what once stood, fresh from the brush, in the studio where both panels were painted over 500 years ago, before time began its own slow work of darkening every old master in shades of amber. For nearly 200 years, visitors walked past this painting on their way to look at other things. The secret it held was never hidden in some locked vault or sealed archive. It was hanging in full view the entire time, disguised as something unremarkable, waiting, like so much of history, for someone to finally look closely enough to ask why.